It started out subtly, like the faintest ripple on a still lake. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. We'd been married for 8 years, and though we'd had our share of ups and downs, I believed our bond was unshakable. I loved her deeply, and she had always been the center of my world. But over the past few months, something had shifted. Her late nights began innocently enough. "Just extra work," she'd said, brushing off my questions with a quick kiss on the cheek. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had always been dedicated to her career, and long hours weren't uncommon in her line of work. But then the late nights turned into entire evenings away, with vague explanations that didn't quite add up. It wasn't just the hours. She'd recently started going to the gym, which I encouraged at first. We both had talked about living a healthier lifestyle, and I was proud of her for taking that step. But the enthusiasm felt off. There was an urgency in the way she prepared for her workouts, a meticulous attention to her appearance that didn't match the sweats and ponytail look she used to adopt. Her gym bag was always perfectly packed, her outfits coordinated in ways I hadn't seen before. Then there was her phone. For years, her phone would sit out on the coffee table, screen up, notifications popping up without a second thought. Now it was always flipped screen down. When I asked about it, she laughed lightly, saying, "It's just a habit. I'm trying to be more present." The words sounded right, but something about the way she said them didn't. I tried to dismiss my unease, convincing myself I was overreacting. After all, relationships go through phases, right? Maybe she was stressed, or maybe I was projecting my own insecurities. But then I found the receipt. It wasn't buried or hidden. It was lying on the kitchen counter one evening. A simple slip of paper from a nearby hotel, dated just a few days earlier. It wasn't a luxury hotel, but it was close, less than a 10-minute drive from our house. I stared at it, the familiar sinking feeling in my gut clawing its way up to my chest. Why would she need to stay at a hotel so close to home? My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was for a client meeting or a work-related conference. But why wouldn't she have mentioned it? When she came home that night, I asked how her day was, as casually as I could manage. She gave me the same detached smile I'd been seeing lately, muttering something about a long day at work and heading upstairs to shower. I didn't mention the receipt. Not yet. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last few months in my head. Her excuses, her distance, the shift in our once effortless connection. The moments I had brushed aside now loomed large in my mind, refusing to be ignored. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I would do. I picked up her phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through her apps, telling myself it was just to ease my mind. But everything was clean. Too clean. Her WhatsApp messages had all been deleted. Her texts were minimal, nothing out of the ordinary. I put the phone back where I found it, but my heart was racing. The absence of evidence wasn't reassuring. It only made my suspicions grow. Who wipes their messages clean unless they're hiding something? The breaking point came one evening when I got home early from work. As I stepped into the house, I heard her laughing from the kitchen. Her laughter was light, carefree, the kind I hadn't heard in months. For a moment, my heart lifted, thinking maybe things were improving between us. But then I realized she wasn't laughing with me. I froze in the hallway, listening. She was on the phone, her tone playful, teasing. And then she said it. "You always know how to make me smile. He has no clue." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. He has no clue. Those 4 words echoed in my head, confirming what I had tried so hard to deny. When she hung up, I stepped into the kitchen, forcing a neutral expression. She turned to me, surprised, her face quickly shifting into a polite smile. "Oh, you're home early," she said, her voice carefully casual. I nodded, pretending not to notice the tension in her shoulders. "Yeah." Things wrapped up faster than I expected. She mumbled something about needing to finish up some emails and hurried out of the room. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, my mind swirling with questions. What was I going to do? Confront her? Accuse her with no hard evidence? Or was I going to pretend I hadn't heard anything? I wasn't ready for the truth. Not yet. But I knew one thing. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. I spent the next few days trying to keep up appearances, pretending that everything was normal. On the outside, I smiled, laughed, and acted as though life was perfectly fine. On the inside, though, I was unraveling. Every word she said, every glance at her phone, every time she left the house. It all felt like a piece of a puzzle I couldn't put together fast enough. I knew I needed more than a sinking feeling in my gut. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it. I could already hear her saying, "You're being paranoid." Or worse, turning it around on me. No, I had to be smarter. If I wanted the truth, I needed evidence. So I took action. The first step was installing a GPS tracker in her car. It was small, discreet, and easy to slip under the passenger seat while she was inside grabbing her gym bag. My heart pounded the entire time, but when she walked out the door, none the wiser, I felt a grim sense of accomplishment. Next, I ordered a set of tiny listening devices online. They weren't high-tech, but they would do the job. One went under the seat of her car, another inside the lining of her favorite tote bag. The last one I installed in the living room, tucked away in the corner behind a bookshelf. If she was talking to someone, I'd hear it. At first, there was nothing unusual. The recordings from her car were mundane. Music playing, a few phone calls with coworkers, and the occasional frustrated groan as she sat in traffic. The house recordings didn't reveal much, either. Mostly silence or the sound of her scrolling through her phone. But then, late one night, as I sat alone in the dark with my laptop, listening through the day's recordings, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Her voice came through, clear as day. "I'm telling you, he doesn't suspect a thing," she said, laughing softly. My chest tightened as I leaned closer to the screen. A man's voice responded, low and smooth. "You're sure? He hasn't said anything?" "No," she said confidently. "He's clueless. He still thinks I'm going to the gym every night. Honestly, I think he feels guilty for doubting me." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. She was talking about me, mocking me, and whoever this man was, he sounded far too comfortable for someone who was just a friend. "Good," the man said after a pause. "I hate sneaking around, though. I wish we didn't have to hide." There was a rustling sound, followed by her voice, softer now. "I know, but it's better this way. We just have to be careful. He's persistent." Persistent. Was that how she saw me? As some sort of nuisance? My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, but I forced myself to listen until the conversation ended. Over the next week, the pieces started falling into place. The GPS tracker showed her frequenting places she had no reason to be. A coffee shop on the other side of town, a residential building in a quiet neighborhood, even a park where she claimed to be jogging. She wasn't meeting clients or coworkers. She was meeting him. The recordings confirmed it. Their conversations were filled with inside jokes, whispers of plans for the weekend, and the occasional flirtatious comment that made my stomach churn. They weren't being careful anymore, growing bolder with each passing day. But the worst moment came when I heard her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in years. It was carefree, genuine, the kind of laugh she used to share with me. Except now it was meant for someone else. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. She had told me she was meeting a friend for dinner, a story she'd used more than once. I watched on the GPS tracker as her car parked outside the same residential building I'd seen before. This time, I decided to follow her. I parked a few streets away and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. After 20 minutes, I saw her step out of the building, arm in arm with a man. They were laughing, her head leaning on his shoulder as they walked toward her car. I snapped a few photos from the car, my hands trembling as I zoomed in on their faces. She kissed him before getting into her car, a quick but intimate gesture that shattered the last remnants of my denial. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When she came home later that night, she acted as though nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, mumbled something about a lovely dinner, and went upstairs to shower. I sat in the living room, staring at the evidence I'd gathered. The photos, the GPS data, the recordings. The truth was undeniable now. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, was living a double life. As I listened to her shower running upstairs, I made a decision. This wasn't going to end with me quietly suffering in the shadows. If she thought I was clueless, she was in for a rude awakening. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the folder of evidence I had compiled, my mind spinning with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. It all hit me at once, a storm I couldn't outrun. But amidst the chaos, one thought rose above the rest. I needed to confront her, and I needed to do it on my terms. The next morning, I took the day off work. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference. She left the house like clockwork, dressed for her meeting, and giving me a casual, "See you tonight," as she walked out the door. I watched her leave, the door clicking shut behind her, and I felt a pang of resentment so strong I almost followed her again right then and there. But no, today wasn't about collecting more evidence. It was about preparing for the end. I began organizing everything. The GPS data, the photos, the recordings. I laid it all out on my laptop, labeling each file with dates and times. I even printed out the clearest photos of her and him together, highlighting the details. Their matching smiles, the way she leaned into him, his hand casually resting on her lower back. It was undeniable. As I worked, I kept replaying the moment I'd first realized something was wrong. That smile she gave her phone, the one that wasn't meant for me. I had brushed it off back then, convincing myself I was imagining things. Now, as I stared at the proof of her lies, I felt a bitter mix of regret and anger. How long had she been laughing behind my back? How long had she been pretending? I reached out to a lawyer that afternoon, a recommendation from a friend who had gone through a messy divorce a year earlier. The lawyer was sympathetic but professional, guiding me through the steps I'd need to take. "You've done the hard part," she said. "You have the evidence. Now it's about protecting yourself." By the time she came home that evening, everything was ready. I had moved my things into the guest room and left her things untouched. The house was eerily quiet as she walked through the door, her cheerful "Hey, I'm back," echoing through the space. I met her in the living room, where my laptop was set up on the coffee table. The screen paused on a photo of her and her lover. She froze in the doorway, her purse dangling from her arm, her face quickly shifting from casual to wary. "What's this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the laptop screen before meeting mine. "About what?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pressed play. The screen lit up with one of the recordings, a phone conversation between her and the man she'd been seeing. Her face went pale as her own voice filled the room, laughing and carefree. "You're insane," she said, standing abruptly. "This is an invasion of privacy." I remained seated, my voice calm but firm. "Sit down." For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she dropped her purse and sat, her arms crossed defensively. "What do you want me to say?" she snapped. "That I've been seeing someone else? Fine, I have. Is that what you wanted to hear?" Her admission hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I'd been expecting it. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her see how much it hurt. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Why do this? Why lie?" She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know. I guess I just wasn't happy." "Weren't happy?" I echoed, my voice rising. "And instead of talking to me, you decided to sneak around behind my back? To laugh at me with him?" She flinched at my tone but didn't respond. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. "I loved you," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I trusted you. And this is how you repay me." She looked at me then, and for a split second, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a cold, defensive stare. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice sharp. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Happy now." Her words felt hollow like an afterthought. I shook my head, standing up and gathering the folder from the table. "You're going to need these," I said, handing it to her. She frowned, flipping through the pages before realization dawned. Her eyes widened. "Divorce papers?" I nodded. "They're already signed. All you have to do is agree, and we can end this without dragging it out." She stared at the papers for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at me, her voice trembling. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes," I said simply. "I deserve better than this." For the first time, I saw something crack in her facade. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg. Maybe, but I didn't wait to hear it. I walked upstairs to the guest room, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. That night, as I lay on the small, unfamiliar bed, I felt a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, sharp and fresh, but beneath it was something else. Freedom. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Tomorrow, the real work of rebuilding my life would begin. But tonight, I let myself feel everything. The hurt, the anger, the loss. And then, slowly, I let it go. The morning after I handed her the divorce papers was one of the strangest of my life. I woke up in the guest room, surrounded by boxes I'd hastily packed the night before. The sheets felt cold, foreign, and the faint smell of her perfume still lingered in the air. A cruel reminder of what was no longer mine. For a few minutes, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unsure of what to do next. The house was unnervingly quiet. I couldn't tell if she was still there or if she had left for work, or maybe for him. Part of me didn't want to know. Another part of me was already on edge, wondering if she'd try to deny everything now that the reality of divorce had hit her. I finally dragged myself out of bed and went downstairs. She was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and her eyes red as if she'd been crying. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her so vulnerable. "You're up?" she said quietly, her voice hoarse. I nodded but didn't respond. I walked to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee, the awkward silence filling the room like a heavy fog. I didn't want to talk to her. What was there to say? "Are we really doing this?" she asked after a long pause. I turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "You tell me," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Do you think there's anything left to save?" She looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her mug. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never wanted it to come to this." My chest tightened at her words. "Then why did you do it?" I asked, the frustration creeping back into my voice. "Why lie to me? Why cheat on me? If you were unhappy, why not just tell me?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I don't have an answer," she said. "I was selfish. I was stupid. I thought I could. I don't know. I thought I could have both." "Both?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought you could have both a husband and a lover? A stable marriage and a fling on the side? Do you even hear yourself?" She flinched, her hands trembling as she gripped the mug. "I know I messed up," she said. "But do we really have to end it like this? Can't we try counseling or something?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Counseling? Now you want counseling? After months of lying, sneaking around, and treating me like a fool? No, it's too late for that." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You think this is easy for me?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You think I don't regret what I did? I'm human, okay? I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean I don't love you." "Love," I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Don't you dare use that word. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't lie, cheat, and humiliate the person it's supposed to protect." Her tears were falling freely now, but I didn't feel pity. Not this time. My heart had been shattered too many times in the past few weeks to feel anything but exhaustion. "I'm moving out," I said finally, my voice firm. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I'll be staying with a friend until everything is finalized. You can keep the house for now, but I want it sold once the divorce is done. Her mouth opened as if to protest, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at me, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. I'll pack my things this weekend, I continued, ignoring the lump in my throat. After that, I don't want any unnecessary contact. If it's about the divorce, we'll go through the lawyers. She sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. I never wanted to lose you, she whispered, her voice muffled. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. You lost me the moment you decided to betray me, I said quietly. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I packed what I could, taking only the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and a few sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. Each box felt heavier than the last, not because of its weight but because of what it represented. The end of a chapter one had once thought would last forever. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. As I carried the last box to my car, I paused in the driveway, taking one last look at the house. This was the place where we had built our life together, where we had laughed, fought, and dreamed of a future that would never come. I got into the car and drove away without looking back. That night, I stayed at a friend's house, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The pain was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind, but it was tempered by a newfound clarity. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned for my life, but it was a chance to start over, to rebuild, to find a version of myself that wasn't defined by betrayal and heartbreak. As I lay in bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I made a promise to myself. I would heal. I didn't know how long it would take, but I would get there. One day, I would look back on this moment and see it not as a tragedy but as the beginning of something new. And with that thought, I finally allowed myself to close my eyes and rest. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of grief and liberation. I moved into a small apartment not far from my old house. A modest place, nothing fancy, but it felt like a fresh start. The silence was overwhelming at first. No sounds of her moving around the house, no laughter or arguments, no shared meals at the table. But that silence eventually became comforting, a blank canvas on which I could begin to rebuild. Divorce proceedings started swiftly. My lawyer had ensured the paperwork was airtight, and after her initial protest, my soon-to-be ex-wife seemed to accept the inevitable. The process was smoother than I'd expected, though every meeting to finalize details felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Signing those papers was like writing the last chapter of a book I had cherished, even as it unraveled. Friends and family rallied around me, offering support in ways I hadn't anticipated. My best friend practically dragged me to the gym, saying it was time to channel my anger into something productive. My sister, who had always been skeptical of my wife, showed up one weekend with boxes of home-cooked meals, insisting I needed to take care of myself. Even my coworkers, most of whom I'd never shared much personal information with, seemed to sense something was off and subtly lighten my workload. Still, the nights were the hardest. Lying alone in bed, I replayed every moment of our relationship, questioning where it had all gone wrong. Was there something I could have done differently? Had I missed the warning signs sooner? It was a dangerous rabbit hole, one that threatened to consume me if I let it. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to see glimpses of hope. I started therapy, something I'd never considered before. My therapist was patient, helping me unpack the weight of betrayal and guiding me toward acceptance. This isn't about finding closure with her, she told me during one session. It's about finding closure within yourself. And slowly I did. One day, while unpacking a box I hadn't touched since I moved in, I came across an old photo of us from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, arms wrapped around each other, faces lit up with joy. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was different this time, softer, less sharp. I placed the photo in a drawer, out of sight but not out of mind. I didn't want to erase the past. It was a part of me, a part of my story, even if it had ended in heartbreak. As time went on, I began to embrace the freedom that came with starting over. I took up new hobbies, joined a hiking group, and even went on a few casual dates. Nothing serious, but enough to remind me that there was life beyond the wreckage of my marriage. One day, while scrolling through social media, I came across a photo of her. She was at a party, smiling for the camera with a group of people I didn't recognize. She looked happy, or at least she looked like she was trying to be. I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, no bitterness. Just a quiet sense of peace. The final piece of the puzzle came months later, on the day our divorce was finalized. I sat in the courtroom, listening as the judge read through the terms, and when it was over, I felt an immense weight lift off my shoulders. Walking out of that courthouse, I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. It was over. Not just the marriage, but the pain, the doubt, the constant questioning. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, a reminder that even the darkest days eventually give way to light. I raised my glass, a simple toast to myself, to survival, to the promise of a better tomorrow. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine now, and I was determined to make it something beautiful. Support the channel with a subscription, it really makes a difference.